I'd like to introduce our first guest this morning, a very distinguished guest for our Peace Corps community. This is Carol Spahn, who is the acting director of the Peace Corps since January of 2021. Prior to serving as the acting Peace Corps director, Carol was the chief of operations for the Africa region, and she was then part of that Peace Corps country director Malawi for 5 years. She is an RPCD. She served in Romania from 1994 to 96. And she's really undertaking a strong reprogramming and retooling of the Peace Corps while there are currently no volunteers in the field. And she's, I think, doing a stellar job of stewarding the organization forward and introducing some innovative programs such as remote service and Peace Corps response volunteers serving domestically in COVID response. But I'm really pleased to have Carol with us this morning. I know that she's had a busy schedule this week. Really grateful for her taking time out of her schedule. And thank you so much, Carol, for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you for your introductory remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, Glenn. And I can think of nothing really more important than being here today with the Peace Corps family. Want to thank you and all of the MPCA staff and board members for convening us, and for everyone who has been participating in events this week. A special shout out to Congressman John Garamendi, former Congressman Sam Farr and Joe Kennedy, to William Josephson, the founding counsel for the Peace Corps, and so many others. Thank you so much for offering your support and enthusiasm to the Peace Corps in our 60th year. And to all of the panelists who will be participating in the Asian American and Pacific Islander discussion, and the esteemed award winners that we will hear from later this evening, thank you for your passionate contributions. We really are looking forward to ensuring that the Peace Corps experience is inclusive and attainable to all. Also would like to echo my thanks, as you did, Glenn, to all 240,000 who have served in the Peace Corps, and to all of the returned Peace Corps volunteers who are here today. It is such a gift to be part of this community, and this community that continues to show up years and decades later to be with each other and to work together to make the world a better place, to make the agency the best that it can be. We value you. We are listening. We are here with you. And we really thank you for your support. The event yesterday at Arlington Cemetery was just a profound example of people coming together and reuniting and reinvigorating that core commitment to world peace and friendship. So for many of you, the last time we met was several months ago, and I know that most of you have a burning question on your minds, which is, when will volunteers get back out into service? And I don't think I need to explain to anyone the enormity of the pandemic's impacts on health, safety, and well-being around the world, as well as the disproportionate impact that it has had on many of the countries where our volunteers served. We are all anxious to get out there and to be a part of the solution, and finding the balance between health and safety of our volunteers and the communities has been one of the biggest challenges of my time as acting director. I will say, when we first evacuated volunteers in March of 2020, which in itself was an amazing feat, we evacuated almost 7,000 volunteers in just 8 days. We all thought that we would turn around and get all of those volunteers back out into service 3 or 4 months later after COVID passed. We immediately got to work putting procedures in place, setting up expedited applications, and working very hard to make sure that we were ready for that time. Just as we were gearing up to get volunteers back into service, we hit the second wave of the pandemic. So we pulled back. When I took this position in January, we thought we will get volunteers vaccinated and we will be able to get them right back out into service. And then the Delta variant hit. I think at this time, we all recognize that COVID will be with us for some time, and much longer than we expected. None of us expected to be having this conversation still 18 months after the evacuation of volunteers. We have very strong plans in place to keep volunteers safe, and we are evaluating every country individually. We have seen how they've handled the pandemic and multiple waves of the pandemic in their own communities. And we are assessing their health systems as well as other factors like medical evacuation hubs and the availability and stability of those hubs. So I am happy to say that we have several countries that are making it through our very rigorous process. We are hopeful that we will be able to get some volunteers out towards the beginning of 2022. But we all know that the pandemic does continue to throw us curveballs, and we will get volunteers out just as soon as it is safe to do so. When I think about this time, I think about what cultural anthropologists call a liminal experience. This is a disorienting period when things are neither here nor there, when things have been so disrupted that we are forced to really think about things differently. And this is not just Peace Corps, this is happening around the world. But when I think about Peace Corps' role in the world, in our rich history, there are so many examples of how Peace Corps has helped to rebuild countries following civil war, disasters, how we came in after apartheid, after the end of the Cold War, and much more. We also have a very rich history in supporting prevention and eradication of various diseases and supporting global health. So we will need to adapt to a new reality, but we've done it before. And I can say that there is no organization and no people like Peace Corps volunteers who are better prepared in times of the unexpected. Peace Corps volunteers know how to listen first, to see what's possible, to inspire collaboration, to challenge the status quo, and to handle uncertainty. We withstand adversity, we learn through hardship, we adapt to changing circumstances, we innovate, we partner, we fail, and we come back again until the problem's been solved. In fact, we demand to be challenged, to have our beliefs questioned, to ask the hard questions, and to acknowledge our own shortcomings. And we make lifelong friends around the world along the way. And I have just been so inspired during this time to see how the broad Peace Corps community has stepped up, surrounded by so many of you and so many staff members whose very nature it is to raise your hand, to jump off the sidelines, to approach obstacles, and to get in there and solve problems. I am so very grateful to the 150 Peace Corps response volunteers who closed their service last month after contributing to the domestic whole of government efforts to reach underserved communities with critical health information and access. The stories from this partnership with FEMA, which is only the second time that Peace Corps has deployed domestically in our history, have been truly amazing. We have volunteers who reached out to a homeless community in Oregon, and the people there did not want to go to the vaccination site. So what does a volunteer do? They went back to the vaccination site and brought the doctors and nurses to them. We have volunteers who used Amharic, Wolof, Arabic, Spanish, and many other languages to reach people, to build trust, to build connections in underrepresented communities throughout the United States. Likewise, I'm profoundly grateful to our 240 virtual service pilot participants. Through this engagement, you have challenged the status quo and demonstrated that through technology, we can realize impact and that partnerships can be sustained. It's just been amazing to hear how participants serving virtually in Nepal are supporting government health and agricultural workers to combat growing food insecurity and economic hardship attributable to COVID-19. We have virtual service participants in the Eastern Caribbean who have developed a blended learning program, and they're training teachers across 4 countries to use digital and online learning to help students return to learning and recover from educational disruptions. And I'm just thrilled to see how the potential of this virtual service program can just really tear down barriers to service, both for volunteers who can't serve overseas and for communities that for health, safety, or other logistical reasons can't host volunteers in person. This pilot has just been terrific. And the latest round of this pilot, very proud to say that we have returned volunteers from every decade, from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, returning to their country of service virtually to support them during this time. It is such an amazing tribute to the legacy of Peace Corps and the real commitment that is not just those 2 years when a volunteer serves, but that really extends a lifetime. I would be remiss if I didn't also highlight the tremendous work being done by our staff around the world. Since the global evacuation, our staff have been working tirelessly to keep advancing Peace Corps' mission of world peace and friendship. The work and partnerships that have emerged so organically during this time are remarkable. So in Rwanda, our staff have partnered with the Centers for Disease Control to conduct virtual contact tracing to minimize the spread of COVID. And this is very similar to the commendable work staff undertook during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa from 2014 to 2016. In Timor-Leste, staff have been partners to the Ministry of Health and the World Health Organization and have translated COVID-19 information and guidelines into Tetun and 9 other local languages, promoting equitable access to health information throughout the country. Almost every single post around the world is directly contributing at this time to the objectives of the United States COVID-19 Global Response and Recovery Framework. And technology has been a key tool during this time, not only for the virtual service, but also for our staff. In North Macedonia, after completing our 8-week course developer certificate practicum, our staff partnered with the Ministry of Education and delivered workshops to all 25,000 educators from 1,000 public schools in the country so that they could educate their students virtually. Meanwhile, our global agency has poured time and attention into strengthening our systems. This time without volunteers in the field has given us a unique opportunity to make strategic improvements. And I would like to encourage all of you to sign up for Inside Peace Corps, which is a newsletter that we are putting out that really pulls back the curtain so that you can see the improvements that we are making. And there are too many to sort of laundry list at this time, but I do want to raise a couple. First, keeping equity at the heart of our work. We continue to ramp up our intercultural competence, diversity, equity, and inclusion practice. We have gained invaluable insights from our RPCV community through the Connect to the Future report, through our barrier analysis, and our diversity, equity, and inclusion task force. And we have implemented unconscious bias training for all of our staff around the world. Every single staff member has been asked to complete this mandatory training. And last time I checked, we were at 95% completion rate, which is very exciting. We will also be requiring this training for volunteers before they go out into service. We are also approving a new position that will focus on retention. So looking at volunteers in the pipeline to ensure that we understand what the barriers are for our volunteers of color, our applicants of color who are applying to the Peace Corps, and that we are at a place to remove those barriers. We also have a new programming, training, and evaluation system that looks at core competencies, and among those are ICD&I competencies, which we are intentionally building accountability through to our host countries. These will be used globally, and volunteers will all be evaluated on a standardized set of ICD&I competencies, which set clear levels of how volunteers are expected to master many technical skills and demonstrate the agency's values through their volunteer assignments. There is so much that is going on in this space. I'm very excited about it, and you will see a lot of it in our you'll see it published in our strategic plan when that is released. I'm also excited to announce that one of the big ideas we were asked to consider in the 2020 Peace Corps Connect to the Future report was around ethical storytelling. We've taken this recommendation seriously and are developing an ethical storytelling toolkit for staff, volunteers, and RPCVs, and that will equip us all with the awareness and communication tools necessary to keep our host communities at the heart of our storytelling. Through this work, we aspire to achieve a more ethical and equitable storytelling standard that extends across all of the Peace Corps network and ensures that Peace Corps members have a sense of belonging and that we are honoring identity throughout. Finally, I know that many of you have deep concerns about our sexual assault reduction and risk response program. We are committed to strengthening this program and have been taking a long, hard look at where it can be improved. We've taken several actions already that are aimed to reinforce this system and that also respect the rights, the privacy, and the needs of any volunteers who experience any crime during service, including sexual assault. We have many, many improvements that we have made. And again, I won't list them all here, but we'll refer you to Inside Peace Corps. But I am very proud of the advances that the agency has made in this space, and am very personally committed and accountable for this work. I want to end by quoting from a speech that President Biden gave at the UN General Assembly. He said, "There is a clear and urgent choice we face here at the dawning of what must be a decisive decade for our world, a decade that will quite literally determine our futures. And whether we choose to fight for our shared future or not will reverberate for generations to come." This is a pivotal moment in our history, and the parallels between where we were in 1961 and where we are now are striking. The core of what we do as Peace Corps, person-to-person exchange, and the value of living and working together will not change. But we can create a Peace Corps that transcends the experience we all know and love to create a new and improved Peace Corps, one that encompasses the diverse, equitable, and inclusive vision we have, a vision of an agency that is able to respond quickly to shifting realities and utilize a variety of creative tools and modalities to combat some of the greatest threats of our lifetime. We are all inextricably linked to that legacy, and I am just, again, so pleased to be part of this Peace Corps family, particularly at this incredibly important time in our history. So Glenn, happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Carol. Obviously, you and your team have been very busy in headquarters and around the world, and we really appreciate the update on all the activities and all the advances that you've made. Let me just say, from my perspective, we're really fortunate to have you leading the agency at this pivotal moment, as you described it, and all the work that you're doing, we know, is toward making the Peace Corps the best that it can be. And I'm just so pleased to hear many of the things that you are already working on and have worked on with your teams and what you're working on in the field. We stand with you, Carol. We support you. We're anxious, of course, to see volunteers abroad again. And when the conditions permit, we'll cheer you onward as those volunteers step off the plane and start serving again. Many folks don't have the opportunity to hear from you very often. We are at a lot of events and a lot of reunions and everything. I have regular meetings with you, Carol, and I'm really fortunate to be able to have that. And we coordinate together and communicate together. But we do have some questions that have emerged from our community that we just would like to share as a part of the conversation this evening. So thank you for allowing some time for some participation here by our community and the questions that we've fielded from them and that we can share with you. First and foremost, Carol, you mentioned the Connect to the Future Summit last year and the report that came out of that. I know that you have read it front to back. I know you've referenced it many times in your remarks, and you have pointed out very specific things that the agency is working on implementing or adapting, such as one of the big ideas about ethical storytelling. And we've seen that in the Return Peace Corps volunteer community as well, in terms of the training and work that you've done there on that front. That report, of course, is full of all kinds of things and a lot of recommendations, big ideas, recommendations, and so forth. And we know that that those have been very important to you and hopefully have been useful to you as well. Are there any others that stand out to you as things that you feel that the community spoke loudly about last fall, and that you have been working to implement in addition to the ones you already mentioned?
Absolutely, and it is a report that I go back and look at quite frequently. And as we went through our strategic planning process, it was one of the many inputs that we factored in, and I think you will see it reflected in the strategic plan. There are so many. Giving priority to hiring people of color. We will have very specific goals and objectives around that, and are implementing systems for how to do outreach more intentionally into different communities, both for staff and for volunteers. And we would love to engage the entire returned Peace Corps volunteer community in helping us to do that. So thank you for that. There are also recommendations about providing financial assistance. We are looking to pilot some new programming this year to look at things like how can we support volunteers who might not be able to pay the upfront costs of medical clearance. Is there a way that we can provide vouchers to them or provide some other kind of financial support so that they are not needing to carry that cost until they can be reimbursed? We have been partnering with AARP, and they've been a great supporter. So looking, for how to recruit all kinds of diversity and bring that into Peace Corps. There are so many. There are too many, things in the report to actually hit them all. But there was a lot of depth there, and we really do appreciate that feedback from the community.
Thank you, Carol. I will just acknowledge that this is a report that was summarized by a Special Advisory Council to National Peace Corps Association that includes recommendations to our own organization and our own community, as well as the agency. And I'm very grateful for the role of that Advisory Council and the leadership that they've provided in collecting the collective voice of our community and preparing that report and the question that came from them. If you allow me the liberty to segue a little bit off of that question in terms of those parts of the report that have found their way into legislation, because the report, of course, was also shared with our members of Congress. Some of those reforms and improvements and provisions that emanated from that report are in the legislation that we've been talking about here the last couple of days and the last several weeks and months even. And that is HR 1456 with Congressman Garamendi's introduction of the Peace Corps Reauthorization Act that includes not only funding recommendations, but a variety of different other recommendations. Some of those provisions in that legislation came directly from the Connect to the Future report. Anything in there in the legislation that I think you're familiar with stand out to you, or any particular views about that, or parts of it that you support or maybe don't support directly?
Look, I think that the reauthorization bill is incredibly important. It has been since 1999. That was the last Peace Corps reauthorization. So it's really important that we get that updated and get the bill, a new bill into place. And the bill really does have a lot of provisions in there that are very supportive of our volunteers and our volunteer community.
Thank you very much, Carol. Okay. Let's talk about climate change for a moment, if you don't mind. I know, as you mentioned, kind of reprogramming in the field and looking at your programs again, and I think there's an expectation also reflected in the report from the Peace Corps Connect to the Future about programs that would include expanding the work that Peace Corps does on the climate change front. I know that President Biden, who you mentioned was at the UN General Assembly this week, spoke about climate change and the importance of climate change. And can you tell us a little bit about, what do you see as the Peace Corps' role in addressing climate change issues in the countries where we serve? And then, I have a couple of specific questions here from members of our community that I will ask. But let me just start by asking you, given the urgency of climate change, what do you see the Peace Corps doing? How do you envision the Peace Corps leveraging its volunteers in the field to address many adverse impacts on the communities that we serve?
Mm-hmm. I mean, climate change is clearly a priority of the administration and is of critical importance globally. Peace Corps has contributed for quite a long time through the environment sector and our agricultural sector to climate change, and there are many, many examples of that. But we do need to do more, and we will be pulling in additional resources to examine new and innovative partnerships that we can bring on board as we bring volunteers back into service.
Thank you. And one or more concerned returned Peace Corps volunteers, I believe, asked about 3 former Pacific Island nations, which the Peace Corps has worked in, which are predicted to be the first uninhabitable countries as a result of global climate change. Any advice or any suggestions about how the agency or NPCA or our community in general can support those friends of ours in these endangered nations? What do you think about that?
Well, first, it's a terrible tragedy to have any nation that is uninhabitable due to climate change. I'm not in a position to speak directly to any of those specific countries, but I do think it's important that we continue to advocate for them and for those people. It is unacceptable that has been the impact of climate change for those individuals, and it is really just heartbreaking to hear that that's where we are at this point. And it just speaks to the real need to step up around the world in every way we can to combat climate change. Thank
you very much. Shifting a little bit here, you touched on the topic that's one that we really want to lean in and listen on, Carol, and this is regarding sexual assault risk reduction and response. A question from our community is, what is the status of the congressionally mandated Sexual Assault Advisory Council that is charged with assessing Peace Corps efforts to address sexual assault and offering best practices? Could you tell us when the Advisory Council last met and 2 or 3 of the Council's most recent findings?
Sure. Well, the Council is very active. They have been meeting since April, May, several times a month. And what we've asked them to do this year is a couple of things. First is to look back over the last 5 years at the recommendations of the Council and really assess where we are and see what is relevant from those prior recommendations, where do we still have work to do, and what are the most important things going forward. So they have been very actively working on that for the past several months, and they will be preparing a report for us that we are expecting before the end of the year, and we will make that report public. So I want to really thank those Advisory Council members. Those are unpaid positions and people, again, who care deeply about Peace Corps, and we put a big task in front of them this year to really dig in deep. We have also put out a call for proposals, and we will be having a review of the overall structure of our sexual assault and risk reduction program to make sure that it is structured in the best way to make sure that we are a continuously learning organization. There is no entity that can say we have fully concluded and have the best way to really meet sexual assault survivors where they are. And if there was an easy sort of best practice, that we could say, hey, this is our final, our final program, that would be terrific. But we are all learning, we're all growing, and we are really committed to listening and to improving and to putting the systems in place so that we can be the best that we can be.
Thank you, Carol. I've seen that commitment from you, and thank you for working hard in that area. We do have a special session, I believe, on Saturday around 4 o'clock as part of this conference related to safety and security of volunteers over the years, and particular focus on some legislation over the last decade, and then just other areas in which we've heard from our community that the Peace Corps really needs to focus on improvements and accountability. So certainly, if this is a topic of interest, be sure to tune in to us on 4 o'clock on Saturday. Question for you from the community here again. This is a little bit about the work that you've mentioned that's being done on the domestic front. The agency, I should say, has always done well at establishing some interesting partnerships. One of those, of course, with FEMA. Again, this year, and Department of Homeland Security and others, other agencies that Peace Corps has been working with. Do you see any other future domestic partnerships with DHS, any other agencies where you might, for example, deploy volunteers to the border, the southern border, and the like? Do you see any other partnerships in the future there? Particularly while I guess we have no volunteers in the field is probably how the question was framed.
Sure. So Peace Corps' authorization is such that we can only deploy domestically at the specific request of another federal agency. So it's through the Stafford Act that we do that, and we did it at the request of FEMA for the domestic deployment. So we will certainly consider any request that is coming from another federal agency now or in the future. We're very happy to work in the interagency space and to step up when there are times of crisis. We have stepped up in different ways through our staff to support refugees at the border and also to support the Afghan refugees who have been coming in over the last month.
Yeah, great. We're very happy to see these domestic programs rolled out and working on really important issues back here at home. So thank you for that, and kudos to you and your team for making those partnerships work that way. A question here from the community, I think I'm just going to frame in kind of the context of your role and that of country directors abroad in terms of programs and volunteers in the field. The individual says, I've served twice, 42 years apart, and my biggest concern both times was being placed in sites with little or no work. The second tour, I figured it out in 2 weeks, and it took me a whole year to get a transfer. I believe other volunteers would agree that this is a problem. What's the director's plan to stop this from happening? And I'm just going to say maybe address that a little bit, kind of across the board. How do country directors and how does the Peace Corps leadership, look at issues like attrition and early terminations and challenges with volunteers in their sites and how you're responsive to the situations like this person who asked this particular question, who served twice now already, and maybe had a little bit of frustration with how his assignment went. Could you just share a little bit about kind of the role of the country staff leadership there and the headquarters work on these areas?
Let me take that from maybe the position of job structure, right? So that is, I believe, what's at the heart of some of that. And, some Peace Corps assignments are highly structured, if you're a teacher, for example, and others by their nature are a little less structured. What we've done as an agency is ensure that we have a logical project framework for each project that really defines what are the expected outcomes and what activities will help us to achieve those outputs and outcomes. And we've designed very specific training to align to those so that we can see very clearly how it is that we're training volunteers, how that matches up with what we expect them to do, and what outcome and what impact we expect to see. So that is what we're calling, there's a volunteer competency model that leads into this logical project framework. Now, every volunteer's experience is unique, and we know that things are not always as smooth as they sound when it's on paper. And it is the job of the team and country to work very closely with the community to ensure that the community has very clear expectations of what a volunteer can and can't do, and that the volunteer has very clear expectations of how they go into the community and really assess those needs and integrate and adapt as they see what those community needs are. So it is a complex process, and it is something that requires a lot of skill. It requires a lot of flexibility, and in most cases, it works beautifully, and in some it doesn't. And we really do look at each individual case. If there is a volunteer where things are not working out in a community, we ask our country directors to really get our staff out there and work with the community and work with the volunteer, and have several levels of effort, in trying to bring all of that together. It's always the last option to move a volunteer. That is incredibly disruptive to the volunteer who's invested a lot of time in that community and to the community who's invested a lot of time, preparing for that volunteer to be there.
Absolutely. And, we really recognize the role of volunteers, or excuse me, by the staff in the field. And, that's what they're doing right now, is preparing the way for the volunteers' return. And there's a lot of work being put into, I think, making sure that when volunteers do return, when conditions permit, that they're going to have the support and training and services that they need to be successful and to have a positive experience. So we would commend all of the staff out there who are working hard right now to make sure the pathway is open for volunteers to return. Meanwhile, you had mentioned, I think, earlier too, and we've heard a lot about these virtual service pilots. Could you tell us a little bit about what you think about the future of virtual volunteering as well, and what have you learned from the current programs?
Mm-hmm. So I think the future of virtual volunteering is bright, right? We are committed to doing whatever we can to continue and continue to build that out. I think it's shown tremendous promise for how volunteers can stay engaged. You can stay engaged long after your service, supporting communities in a variety of ways. And as I mentioned in my remarks, the true beauty of virtual service is that there might be people who can't clear medically, and they would still have an option to serve. We might have people with very specific skills that a country is looking for that might not be able to leave home for 2 years, but could contribute in other ways. And we have regions that can't be reached due to safety and security issues. And we even saw this with Paraguay. There was an organization, ecotourism, and a national park site that volunteers were not able to reach for a variety of reasons. And there's now a virtual volunteer who is helping through radio programming and other things to support that diversity, to support the environmental programs in that area. There's just tremendous promise. Will it ever replace the 2-year volunteers and that on the ground connection? No. That is where the magic of Peace Corps happens, in living and working together side by side for an extended period of time. But will it be a terrific supplement using all of the tools that we have at our disposal? Absolutely.
Great. And it's really notable that the Peace Corps has been so innovative in adapting to the situation we find ourselves in, that I know that initially I think it was probably foreseen to be maybe a 3 or 4 month window until volunteers might be returning, then 6 months and 8 months. And so really adapting and launching these virtual service pilots, very commendable. Carol, to you and your team for showing the spirit of the Peace Corps, in any way possible, and remaining connected and engaged with our communities abroad. So thank you for that. Quick question. We also often wonder how things are going with Peace Corps staffing. Are there any updates you might want to share with us in terms of other staffing that has been done at the Peace Corps? Any of your leadership team that you'd like to share anything about with us?
Well, what I can share is we have a terrific new team of appointees, many of whom came on in the early transition period. We have, I believe, 14 political appointees who are on board now, and several more who will be coming on in the coming months. And it's just been a pleasure working with them. I have no news on the director position or deputy director. A lot of people ask me, but I don't have information about any timing on that.
Well, we all stand waiting for that too, and learning to hear. But Carol, let me just say, you're doing a fabulous job leading the agency, and really I commend you. And if you ever had the opportunity this time or now or later to serve as a director, I think you'd have all of our support. And we really do thank you for the work that you've put in there, because it's you're holding an interim position, if you will, and I know that sometimes comes with little thanks and a lot of stress. So thank you on behalf of all of us for all the work you're doing there. With that, maybe just a penultimate question here to wrap up. What has been your biggest challenge as the acting director? What would you say? And maybe you even want to treat it as the highs and the lows of being the acting director. What could you say about that?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for your support, Glenn. It means a lot. And typically it's my understanding when people are moved into acting positions, you're holding things and until the new director or new deputy is assigned and appointed. And there's not an opportunity to do that right now with Peace Corps. There's too much at stake, and there's too much at stake in the world. So we've really been trying to push the agency forward to look at how we can reimagine service, how we can advance equity, how we can really be ready so that when it is safe for volunteers to go back, we are the best agency that we can be. So I really do thank you for your support, the support of our amazing staff, and all of the folks who are on this call and part of this broad extended network. I said in my remarks, the hardest part is really that balancing act of knowing what the need is that's out there at this really pivotal time in history. Part of a global pandemic, the likes of which we will hopefully never see again in our lifetime, and knowing what value Peace Corps volunteers on the ground can bring, and struggling through the details and all of the nuances to make sure that we can do that safely. And that has been the biggest challenge. And, I mentioned again in my remarks, one of the biggest barriers has been access to medical evacuation hubs, stable access. And, really understanding, I know more about flight schedules and, how all of that works. And we're setting up backup options and, different agreements to get over that hump. But we're all here for the mission of Peace Corps. We are all here to be out in communities and supporting world peace and friendship. And that has been so incredibly frustrating. But I will say that the highs have definitely been seeing that innovation and seeing how people have stepped up. And there are things that as leadership, you say, this is important, let's all go out and do it. And people have stepped up in many ways well beyond what our expectations could have been. So every time I hear stories from the field about what our staff are doing in the absence of volunteers and how they're stepping up has just been incredible. And how we've seen our staff at headquarters really buckle down to get systems in place to accelerate everything so that when we're ready, we really are the best that we can be.
Thank you, Carol. And as you know, that is NPCA's first and foremost goal too, is to help the Peace Corps be its best. And we do that in a collaborative and cordial way, and work together in many ways to make that happen. And we're just grateful for the work that you're already doing right now toward that end, and that our community is doing as well to help make Peace Corps the best that it can be. So as we wrap up here, and we're going to take a quick break after we're done, Carol, just thinking about the theme of the conference that we have this year, it's called Mobilizing for a Lifetime of Service and Impact. Could you just share some closing thoughts here about how the Peace Corps as an agency plays a role in helping RPCVs have a lifetime of service and impact?
I love the theme of this conference, and have seen in so many different ways how our PCVs have stepped up. And I want to give a special shout out to the Friends of Tonga, who won the 2021 Library of Congress honoree for best practices for their virtual Read Aloud program. Just truly impressive. And, as Peace Corps, we are looking to engage with our PCVs and through National Peace Corps Association to really expand that impact, to understand the impact. I encourage everyone to complete the survey that NPCA put out so that we can really understand that and help support it longer term. Our ethical storytelling kit, yes, I did say that right, will be a great tool, and we will be looking to work with our PCVs getting out into underrepresented communities around the United States to really elevate awareness of the Peace Corps.
Thank you very much, Carol. And thank you for the plug for the survey, by the way. We do encourage all of our community to participate in this survey. I think if there's an opportunity, somebody will put that in the chat box either tonight or throughout the conference. And, really, I just want to reiterate, Carol, as acting director, we stand with you. Your community stands behind you. We're proud of you. We're just grateful for your leadership in this time. We know that there's a lot of challenges and so much unpredictability about the Peace Corps volunteers returning and so much work that has to be done to really ensure that they can return back in a safe and secure environment and in a context of a better Peace Corps. So hats off to you and your team. We're very grateful for you. And if there's anything that your community can do for you, we would like for you to tell us. And we will be here to support you and help make Peace Corps better as well. And we'll tell our stories so that other Americans have the opportunity and the interest in serving in the Peace Corps. We are going to continue implementing the third goal as we always have. That goal is continuous and for a lifetime. And really right now, I think as you mentioned, as we can, you're going to hear a lot in our conference about groups and individuals who are just doing amazing things in our community. And we're recognizing many of them with awards or with other honoraries. And we really just want to commend not just them, but the entire Peace Corps community for all the great work that's being done right now in the face of COVID and in the face of racial injustices and in the face of a world that's challenged right now. And Sergeant Shriver, President Kennedy referred to it as that great common cause. And we are, Carol, as you said, we're all in this together and we're all on the same team and we're all working toward that great common cause. And that is about alleviating human suffering when it comes down to it and building peace. So thank you so much for all the work that the agency's doing. Thank you again for being with us tonight. I know, Carol, you've had a lot of engagements this week and you've always made time for a lot of reunions and other meetings and other events that are around the community. I really thank you for taking the time for all of these things. And I know you're going to be joining us for the rest of the conference as well, as much as you can. So thank you so much for your time. As we wrap this session up, we're going to go into a quick break for about 5 minutes, and then you'll hear a video rolling, I believe, and we'll be off and running with our next session, which should start right around 8 o'clock sharp Eastern time. So again, Carol, thank you so very much for being with us.
Great. Thanks for having me. And thank you for all of your support. Take care all.